You want to test me? So, so we appealed it, but he wasn't watching for that. And so on two, I do sound a little loud. And I get excited when I preach sometimes. So I probably don't need to be that loud. Um,
Previously at the Water's Edge.
So we loaded him up in the car. Everything they had. The first 30 some odd years of his life, the first 20 some odd years of his life, and the first few years of the kid's life was in 2 luggage suitcases. That's all they had. Me and Benjamin left a few hours later after kind of getting them settled, and there's some people helping us. And I thought to myself, how in the world are they ever going to make it? Just look at her eyes. Like, she's got these beautiful eyes, and if I could look at those eyes, I would describe those words as hope. You know, they escaped a war-torn region of the world, moving into a crowded, old, dilapidated apartment at 50th and Ames in Omaha. That was like moving into a palace for them. You know, he ended up getting 2 jobs. They ended up taking language classes. The kids, they go to school now, and they speak English, and they're making it. People can make it. People make it all the time. You know, when things seem hopeless, God is still the God of hope. Hope is not some theological concept. Hope is not wishful thinking. Hope is a person. That person's name is Jesus Christ. Now,
now is the time to worship. Come, now is the time to give your heart. Come, just as you are to worship. Come, just as you are before your God. One day every tongue will confess you are God. One day every knee will bow. Still the greatest treasure remains for those who gladly choose you now. Come, now is the time to worship. Come, now is the time to give your heart. Come, just as you are to worship. Come, just as you are before your God. Come. One day every tongue will confess you are God. One day every knee will bow. Still the greatest treasure remains for those who gladly choose you now. One day every tongue will confess you are God. One day every knee will bow. Still the greatest treasure remains for those who gladly choose you now. Come, now is the time to worship. Come, now is the time to give your heart. Come, just as you are to worship. Come, just as you are before your God.
Yeah, that was a really beautiful moment here on Tuesday night. There's a young woman in Gretna who died, and she was a missionary with Youth for Christ and Campus Life, and her husband and children, and just hundreds of others were able to gather and worship and have a visitation. And this is just really made possible through your generosity. Thank you so much for being a generous church. Here on Friday, the place was totally full out there with the Wheeler Elementary blood drive through the Red Cross, and just your donations, it makes all this really, really cool stuff possible. So thank you for being the church. There's many ways to give. You can do so online. You can do so in the offering baskets. There's a lot of ways to give. I'm Craig Finnestead. I'm one of the pastors here. Welcome. Thank you so much for worshiping this morning. We're so glad that you're here. Now, next week is going to be Mother's Day, so for all the mothers, we have a really cool special gift. The other part of them are going to come on Monday and part are going to come on Wednesday, and we can't wait to share those with you. It'd be a great day to invite someone. You can bring your mom, you can come with your mom, but it's Mother's Day next weekend, so we'll be celebrating that. We have a We Explore class. That one's going to be a week from Thursday. It's on May 11th. For any of you who are interested in becoming members of the church or learning more about who we are as the Water's Edge, I encourage you to sign up for that. You can do so at weomaha.com. We're having our We Serve Saturday next Saturday, and I think we're actually full, so we're going to partner with the Lifehouse Partnership. We've given them hundreds of hours over the years and really probably tens of thousands of dollars to purchase diapers for kids and families here in Omaha. It's a great partnership. We'll do the We Serve Saturday every second Saturday of the month. So keep your eyes out for that. Sign up early, and just it's a great way to get to know each other and serve the community that we're in. So a week from Friday, we're having a Work as Worship retreat. So for all of you who have ever tried to connect what you do professionally and connect that with Jesus Christ, this retreat then is for you. It's a great way to explore the significance of what you do every day and connect that to who you are as a follower of Jesus Christ. That's going to be a really cool thing, so check that one out on the website as well, weomaha.com. But that one is going to be, it's an all-day thing. It's a week from Friday on May 14th. So we have a new sermon series that starts today. It's called Old School. What we're doing is we're looking at some old topics, old scriptures, old prayers. We're going to be singing old songs, but Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So that same timeless old school message is even more relevant today than ever. So we have a discussion guide, a study guide, a reflection guide. So you can do this as individuals, you can do this as families, you can do it with your friends, you can do it with your house church. But I encourage you to pick those up. We're going to have those on the way out for you to pick up, and the reflections do start today. For those of you online, all those resources are online as well, and you can just go to weomaha.com/oldschool. Speaking of old school, we're doing some old school Water's Edge stuff today. We got donuts back again. So for those of you who didn't know that, you came and you sat down and you're like, crap, there's donuts, and I didn't know about it. We can get donuts on your way out. We also have old school Coca-Cola in the bottle. We couldn't find Tab or root beer, so all we do is just have Coca-Cola. But if you've worked up an appetite, if you've worked up a thirst throughout the worship service, you can get an old school little bottle of Coke on your way out. I encourage you to do that. And we're also going to do something really cool. We're going to old school sing. We feel it's safe now to do so. So for the first time in well over a year, we're going to just in a few moments stand up and sing, just like you saw the people singing in the video here on Tuesday night. You can sing loud, you can raise your hands because you haven't sang in a long time. But I told AJ earlier this week that we're going to sing for the first time in a long time, and that was probably the biggest smile since I did your wedding about 15 years ago. So so AJ was happy. He was very happy, and I'm guessing the band, y'all are happy about this as well, and it's going to be really cool. So I'm going to pray, and then we're going to sing. So Lord, bless us this morning. We've come to worship, and God, you've been around forever, and we are here today just in this little snippet of time that you have led us here today. And God, help us to take this old, timeless message of the Scriptures and apply them to our lives today. Lord, we're singing songs that might be a couple decades old, but we're singing to the same God who has seen many, many different styles of music throughout the history of your church. Lord, be with us as a church. I thank you for the generosity of the people. Lord, as a church, give us focus, give us clarity as to who you want us to be. Help us to follow you more closely in all that we do. God, right now I want to pray for anyone that might have come to this place this morning in a hurting position, in a desperate position. Lord, just offer comfort and hope. Lord, for those who have come here this morning, just trying to seek to follow you more closely, Lord, help us to do that. Lord, if we've come here just hoping for a word from you, whether it's through a smile, through a song, through a prayer, Lord, whether it's through the message, the scripture reading, whatever it is, Lord, you speak to us with grace and truth. So, Lord, I pray now in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. All right, so you can all stand, and as you're able to, and you can sing as we worship Jesus together.
Oh, good morning, church. It's so good to see people here stand and sing with us. We're going to do some old tunes. This one's called Forever. Thanks to the Lord of God and King, His love endures forever. For He is good, He is above all things. His love endures forever. Sing praise, sing praise. Mighty hand and outstretched arms, His love endures forever. For the life that has been reborn, His love endures forever. Sing praise. Sing praise, sing praise, sing praise, sing praise. Forever God is faithful, forever God is strong, forever God is with us, forever. Faithful, forever God is strong, forever God is with us, forever, oh, forever, oh, forever. Sing praise. Sing praise, sing praise, sing praise, sing praise. Sing it out one more time, forever. Forever God is faithful, forever God is strong,
tonight. Sing it with us. Be thou my vision. Be thou my vision, O Lord of my heart. Not be all else to me, save that thou art. Thou my best star, by day or by night, waking or sleeping, thy presence my life. Be thou my wisdom, and thou my true word, and I ever with thee, and thou with me, Lord. Thou my great Father, and I thy true Son. Thou in me dwelling, and I with thee one. Be thou my battle shield, sword for the fight. Be thou my dignity, thou my delight. Thou my soul shelter, and thou my high tower. Raise thou me heavenward, no power of my life. Singing out riches. Riches I heed not, nor man's empty praise. Thou mine inheritance, now and always. Thou and thou only are first in my heart. High King of heaven, my treasure, thou art. Oh, treasure, treasure thou art. Thou and thou only are first in my heart. High King of heaven, my treasure, thou art. Thank you for singing. You may be seated.
Do you remember like what is this thing over here? I want the 1980s term for it. A boombox, okay? Now, do you remember, like, does anybody here remember, like, just perfect timing to start recording a song off the radio because that was the only way you could get something without buying the album yourself. This is great. I love this entire stage. It's just shag carpet up here. Anybody have shag carpet in their rooms growing up? That creeps me out just a little bit. Michelle was sending me pictures. She goes, "This is going to be on stage with you." And I said, "No, it's still there." All right, so these things that are on the screen, I brought a prop with me. What are these big things on the screen? Okay, somebody who is under 40 years of age. Can you tell me what this has to do with those? Somebody who's under 40, raise your hand and tell me, what does this have to do with those? What's that? You should stick the eraser inside the hole in the tape and you'd twist it and turn it. So we're going old school this series, right? We were wondering as we were coming up with all these ideas, they wanted me to like write out my entire sermon on paper, and I said, no, I want to be able to read it. So let's go old school for just a minute. This is me on May 27th of 1995. High school graduation for Millard North. There were 548 students, parents, siblings, aunts, and uncles, and we all packed into where? In Omaha, 1995. Where did every graduation take place? The Civic Auditorium, God rest its soul, right? That place is a distant memory these days, and so is my graduation. I'll be really honest with you, like that entire month was kind of a blur, right? Things were moving so fast. We had graduation parties and all that different stuff. Some popular graduation gifts back then were like TVs and refrigerators to send kids off to college with, or microwaves for their dorms. A couple of kids I knew got new cars. Another popular one was like in-dash CD players. Those were coming, and those were pretty popular. And lots of people would go to graduation parties, and they'd put money in envelopes, and they'd drop them in baskets at grad parties. And my guess is, for the most part, not much of that has changed, except for maybe the fact that we don't have in-dash CD players anymore, right? All your music's on your phone, and you just take it with you wherever you go. So this week, here at the Water's Edge, we are actually recognizing our high school graduates. And over the next few weeks, thousands of students across Omaha, and probably millions of students across the U.S. are going to be graduating from high school. They're going to be finishing. They're going to be stepping off into the next stage of their life. And for a lot of these kids, this is a major accomplishment, right? For some of their parents, they're astonished and amazed and just so excited that their kids have made it this far. And others, this is just a rite of passage. It is a movement into the next step of their life, whether that's college or a job or trade school or whatever they're moving on to. It is a step forward, and it is a time for them. For most of these kids, it's going to be the biggest transition that they've had in their entire life. Over the next month or so, though, for most of them, not much is going to change. It's going to be busy. There's going to be finals. There's going to be locker clean out and senior banquets and graduation parties. And some of them, I think most of them get their yearbooks in the fall now, of yearbooks and all that kind of stuff. And all that's going to go on, and it's going to be fun and exciting. But despite all of the busyness, the day after graduation, they're going to wake up, and they're going to be in the same bed that they've slept in for the past 18 years. They're going to have to mow the lawn. Not much is going to change probably over the next month for them. They're going to have to go to work, watch their younger brothers or sisters during the summer. God willing, this summer is going to be a pretty normal summer for a lot of these students. But at some point, maybe it's in July when they start placing orders on Amazon and they're dropping off boxes every other day of dorm supplies and textbooks and cases of mac and cheese and ramen noodles for those late night study sessions. Maybe it's when they get to their dorm room or their roommate assignment. Maybe it's when their younger siblings go back to school this fall and they're starting to pack up to leave for college. Things at that point are going to start to feel different. Now, for me, I didn't leave for college my first fall. I enrolled in and started going to West Dodge High. Anybody remember what we used to refer to West Dodge High, what that actually is? UNO, right? Like, that was our unaffectionate name for the University of Nebraska at Omaha because it didn't have dorms. And so for anybody that stayed in Omaha that went to UNO, you lived at home. A lot of stuff didn't really change for you. I had a full-time job for that summer, and that carried over into my first 2 years of school. And aside from the location where I took classes, a lot of my life, it didn't change for a couple of years. But 2 years later, I transferred schools, and I remember this vividly. My parents and I, we packed up a couple of vehicles. We drove 4.5 hours northeast to Waverly, Iowa. I unloaded everything into a dorm room. I met a guy that I'd never met before who was supposed to be my roommate and two others who were my suite mates, and we attended this little goodbye worship service in the campus chapel. And then my parents, they gave me a hug. They got in the car, and they drove back to Omaha. And for the first time in my life, I was a couple of 100 miles away from home. I was living in a strange place with 3 strangers. I was sharing a bedroom and a bathroom with these guys who I had no idea what their hygienic habits were. And for the first time in my life, I was also responsible entirely for myself. Nobody was there to tell me to go to class, when to go to bed, what was healthy to eat in the cafeteria, or nobody was forcing me to go do my homework or to study. And to say that these things were an adjustment would be an understatement, because that was when everything started to change for me. So you might be heading off to college or having a major change in your life, and that's awesome. And for these kids that are doing that, they're going to get there and they're going to be excited for everything that lies ahead of them. And then they're going to wake up in a smaller bed than they've probably slept in for the past few years. They're going to have a roommate, which most of them probably haven't had over the last few years or even most of their life. They're going to be going to classes in new buildings with people that they've never been around before. And their parents aren't going to be there to drag them out of bed, to make them pancakes, and to make sure that they make it to class on time in the morning. Now, if you're here and most of you aren't graduating because the graduates are all coming at the second service, and you're wondering, well, why am I talking about graduates and what does this have to do with anybody else in the room? Don't go anywhere just yet. Because even though I'm talking about graduation and the changes that high school students are going to be experiencing as they head off to college, the reality is that for all of us, change happens, right? Change and transition, shifts in our lives, they happen to all of us. It isn't just for people who graduate high school or college and are trying to figure out what's next in their lives. And if we've learned anything over the past 15 months, it's that change happens. It is inevitable. Every single one of us, at some point in our lives, we will face changes and we will face transitions. From elementary to middle school, from middle school to high school, from high school to college, from tech school or even into the workplace. When we change majors, I did that 3 times. When you have your first internship, your first full-time job, when you get a roommate after college and you have to figure out how to live with them, when you start dating somebody, when you break up with them, when you get married, when you have your first kids, when you change jobs, when you become an empty nester, when you have grandkids, when you get to retire, and even when we face the loss of loved ones. All of these things are changes, right? And we use different terms for this. Beyond change, we use transition, adjustment. Sometimes we say we're reinventing ourselves, or we're just simply adapting to what's going on. And all of this is a natural part of life. And so learning to both survive and thrive as we go through these things, that's vitally important. And to some extent, we really don't have a choice, right? We do not have a choice in learning to adapt to the changes that we face. On a practical level, most of us have been doing this throughout our entire lives. We've made new friends, we've picked up new jobs, we've adjusted to new schools, we've learned new skills, and we've adapted to new bosses and supervisors. And we go through life and we don't have a choice. But at some level, transition doesn't just take place in the overall whole life that we live. It also happens on that emotional and that spiritual level. And in the midst of all the change and the transition and the different things that we face, it is worth taking a moment to look at and think about the things that never change. the things about our faith and about our lives that as we go through them that we can hold fast to, we can rely upon, and we can move forward with when everything else seems to be changing and shifting. And so today I want to cover 4 things that are reminders that we can look at when we're facing times of transition. Now, to be even a little bit more old school, I've invited a good friend of mine to come along on the journey with us. As we go through, we're gonna look at some scripture today, but we're also gonna look at a number of quotes from a guy by the name of Eric Liddell. Does anybody remember who Eric Liddell is? Does anybody remember Chariots of Fire? All right, and we're like back in the now we've moved from the 90s way back into the 80s, right? Eric Liddell was a runner, a sprinter for England in the 1920s, and he was in the movie Chariots of Fire. He wasn't in the movie. They portrayed his story in the movie Chariots of Fire, and we're going to follow some of the things that he has to say. So when he comes along for the journey, it's kind of fun to see. He had a lot to say about transition and change and some of the things that we're talking about today. The first thing I want to let you know, though, is that passion is worth pursuing. At Youth Group, we've been looking at the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah is a story about one man's passion, about his dream and his desire. And this one man, his name was Nehemiah, and he wrote a book about himself. He was passionate about seeing Jerusalem restored. You see, 140 years before this book was written, the Jewish people, they were conquered by an enemy army, and they destroyed the city of Jerusalem. They burned the temple, and they exiled all of the Jews from Jerusalem. And God, though, had promised that one day you're going to return and Jerusalem is going to be restored. And so 140 years later, people were building, or they were beginning to return to the city. They had rebuilt the temple. They were taking residence. They were taking Jerusalem back. But Nehemiah, he saw this big problem, that the walls of the city were still in ruins. And for him, this was a problem for a couple of reasons. There was the practical level, right? That without walls, the city was still vulnerable. It could be attacked. It could be conquered again. And he didn't want that to happen. But there was the spiritual level as well. And what he saw was that the walls, they represented this disconnect that God's people had with God. He believed that leaving the walls in shambles, ruined and falling apart, dishonored God. And he thought that rebuilding them would be a sign that the people, they weren't just returning to the city, but that they were also renewing their relationship with God and they were being obedient to him again. And so this entire book of Nehemiah is about his pursuit of this passion that God gave him in restoring the city and returning God's people to their relationship with him. We have God-given passions, things that we look at and we see that break our heart and push us to say, I want to move and I want to be effective and I want to make a difference. And we need to realize that those exist. There's a second side of passion as well, though, right? Not only do we have these God-given passions that we act on and that we do, that we know that God is leading us toward, but we also have passions and things that interest us and excite us, that bring us joy and pleasure in our lives. For some of you, that might be a sport you play or a hobby you have or something that you do. And those times, when you're in those times of transition or change, for those of you who are or know people that are heading off to college, or maybe you know that some kids, or you got grandkids that are getting ready to do that, these are times, this is the perfect time to discover what some of those passions are, to pursue those. But transition in general is a good time to remember the passions that you have and the things that excite you and bring you joy and fulfillment. Eric Liddell was talking to his sister. The Chariots of Fire, what it does is it chronicles his struggle. Part of the struggle was that his faith made him feel like he could not run on the Sabbath. And so rather than running on Sunday, he entered into a different race. And he ran in the 400 in the Olympics in 1924 in Paris. But there was a struggle that he was going through. Like, he liked to run, and yet his family, they were missionaries. He had been born in China, and as a citizen of England, he was fast and he was running. And he has this conversation with his sister at some point during the movie. And he understands there's this disconnect that he has, and he's struggling to figure out, do I pursue my passion of running, or do I pursue the passion and the call that God's given me for China? And this conversation that he has with his sister, he comes up to her and he says, I've decided that I'm going to be a missionary to China. And she's so excited. And then he says right after, he goes, but I've got a lot of running to do first. And you can see there's disappointment on her face, like, you're not following God's call. And so he clarifies it, and he looks her in the eye and he says, Jenny, I believe that God made me for a purpose, for China. But he also made me fast. And when I run, I feel his pleasure. Now that's the most famous quote that comes out of this movie that I think gets used in churches. But the next part of what he says I think is vitally important as well. And he says to give that up would be to hold God, him, in contempt. Like, to deny that God has given him a gift and a passion for running would actually be almost like he's saying a sin against God. Like, God, you made me this way. Let me, he figured out he needs to use that. He had two passions, to be a missionary and to China and to run. And he knew that God was eventually leading him to China, that that's where he was going to go. But he could not deny the gifts and the ability and the passion that God gave him as a runner. And in the course of time, he discovered he didn't have to deny one in order to pursue the other. So when you find yourself in transition, you're wondering what to do next, or maybe just ask yourself some questions, right? What is my God-given passion? What breaks my heart? What sets my heart on fire and drives me to act on behalf of God and on others? And then what things do you do that bring you joy and give you pleasure? And how can you pursue both of those things regardless of where you find yourself? In John chapter 10, verse 10, Jesus says, I came so that you can have life and that you can have it abundantly. And I don't think that we can experience life abundantly without pursuing both the passions that God has laid on our hearts and given us and the ones that bring us joy and pleasure. So take some time to explore and pray about and discover what those are, no matter who you are. The second thing is that you were created with and for a purpose. And I believe that our passions can and should impact us as we pursue the things that God is calling us to do with our lives. Our passions, they can help us to discover the major we choose, the career path we take, and so many more things. They can help us find direction when we find ourselves in times of transition and in times of change. But at the end of the day, our passions can set us on the right path, but we still need purpose. And I think that there's a difference between those two things. There's this important truth that I've discovered recently, and it's this, is that, maybe not first discovered, but rediscovered, is that apart from our relationship with God, we cannot truly know or pursue our purpose. You see, when our passions and our interests, when those things that I was talking about before, when those meet up with our relationship with Jesus, this is where we truly and fully discover and are able to fulfill our purpose. Because it's in our relationship with the God who created us and designed us and gave us our passions and breathed the very life we live into us that our purpose is found. God's love, it moves beyond us, or it moves us beyond like our selfish desires and our trivial concerns of the world. And in its place, we find new life and we find meaning. It is in this place that we discover purpose. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10 says, we are, all of us, we are God's handiwork. We are created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. So, what are these good works? Like, how do we know what it is that God wants us to do? Well, let's stick with our friend Eric, right? He says it this way: if in the quiet of your heart you feel something should be done, right? The quiet of your heart, you feel something should be done, then just stop and consider whether that is in line with the character and the teaching of Jesus. And if it is, then obey it. Obey that impulse to do it. And in doing so, you will find that it was God who was guiding you. So here's what I think that boils down to. Regardless of the situation that we find ourselves in everything we do, our purpose, our pleasure, our passion, first and foremost is to allow God to lead us and to use God's leading to point others back to Him. And in Matthew, Jesus says it pretty simply. Let your light shine before all men, that they may see your good deeds, those ones that God set before you, and praise the Father in heaven. Whether we find ourselves at times of constant or times of change, wherever you are, you can know that there is and there always will be purpose to your life through your relationship with Jesus. No matter what, your life, what it can be, in times of change, in times of constant, and all these things, your life can be a demonstration. It can be a light in which when other people look at you, they will see and know that there is something different about you. And that they can then discover that the difference that they see in you is Jesus. And that can point them back to God and to discovering for themselves a life of passion and purpose. Third thing is that God's plan, it is in motion. And it is in all things and at all times, even when we don't always see it. Proverbs 16:9 says, in their hearts, humans plan their course, but it is the Lord that establishes their steps. Now, when I started college, I wanted nothing more than to be an athletic trainer. I had everything planned out. I knew the classes I needed to take. I knew the time and the effort that I needed to put into the training room to get hours to be able to sit for the exams. I had everything figured out. And everything was going really great according to my plan until it wasn't. Have you ever had that happen? And by that, what I mean is everything was going great until I miserably failed a class that was required for my major. And then I also badly struggled through and almost failed another. And at that point, the athletic trainer said, until you get your grades up, you can't be in the training room. It just seemed like all of a sudden, everything started to fall apart. It's easy to think that when we face times of transition that nothing is working out for us, that everything that we thought we were supposed to be doing is gone. It's a mess, that everything is failing, that the changes, that the adjustments that we are facing, that they're just a big mess or a complication on our lives, and that our lives are falling into ruin. But throughout the various transitions I've faced, I've come to see that that's not really the case. I've actually come to see that God is still at work in those moments. And Eric says, circumstances may appear to wreck our lives in God's plans, right? The circumstances we find ourselves in, they may appear to wreck our lives and God's plans, but God is not helpless among the ruins. His love is still working. He comes in and he takes the calamity and he uses it victoriously, working out his wonderful plan of love. Now, what I can tell you is that I couldn't see it right then and in that moment at the time when everything was starting to fall apart. But failing those classes, they did eventually start to force me to look at things a little bit differently. And instead of thinking about how everything I had worked for was ruined or flushed down the drain, I started to think about what might be next and what's in store for me. There's a point where we have to move beyond the disappointment and the struggle and the change and that things aren't always working out and into, okay, where are we going next? You see, what I realized was at the same time that I was failing classes and all these doors were being shut on me, that there were some other doors that were seeming to open, that God was starting to lead me in a little bit of a different direction or maybe a lot of a different direction. I was getting involved more and more with the college ministry at the church that I was going to, and even on a level that I couldn't ignore. All right, some doors were beginning to open for me to transfer to a different college. My pastor and his wife and my youth pastor had all at different times made comments to me that were something along the lines of, Chad, I can really see you getting involved in ministry. And when those comments were coming from people that I loved dearly and that I knew cared about me, I couldn't really ignore those either. And so the more I looked around, the more I saw that maybe God was trying to lead me to take some steps in a different direction than where I thought I was supposed to be going. And that maybe what I needed to do was to start looking more to God's guidance than to my own plan. And of course, Mr. Liddell has some things to say about that. He says it this way. He says, every Christian should live a God-guided life. If you are not guided by God, then you will be guided by someone or something else. Keep that in mind. If you are not guided by God, you will be guided by someone or something else. He says the Christian who hasn't the sense of guidance in his life is missing something vital. Where is your guidance coming from? See, I believe that God leads and brings us exactly where we are for a reason. And it's not always our job to understand or to make things happen the way that we expect them to. It is our job to allow God to be the guide and to follow and to keep walking in the steps that God has laid before us and to see where that path leads us. And we're reminded of that in Proverbs chapter 3 where the author says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all of your ways, submit to him and he will make your paths straight. The truth is that you are where you are. And God can and will use you and guide you from wherever you find yourself. So whether it's preparing for college, it's between jobs, it's starting a new season of life, or just wondering what might be next for you, God has you right where you need to be in order for him to lead you to where he wants you to be next. So I've got just one more thing for you, but I'll be honest, it comes in two parts. So 4A is that God's promise is trustworthy. So far, we've talked about pursuing our passions and discovering our purpose and about allowing God to be the one who directs our paths. But here's the thing. Sometimes that takes time. And sometimes discovering our passions takes us a little while longer than we thought, or seeing where God is leading us and guiding us doesn't exactly happen as fast as we think it should. Answers don't always come immediately, whether or even on our own time frame. Okay, God, I got 6 months to figure this out. And God says, yeah, that's not how I work. Things don't always happen when and how or where we think that they're going to. And this is probably the hardest thing about change, is that transition can take time. Adjusting to being away from home when you leave for college, you don't just stay in a room and feel a different room and all of a sudden feel like it's the perfect place for you, right? You have to get used to somebody else living in the same room that you do. For some people, that first roommate is a disaster. And it takes a semester to get used to them, or even a year, and even after that, you're like, I got to find a different roommate. And that can leave you like, why can't I make friends? Or why is it so hard to get along with somebody? Figuring out what you're good at or passionate about and what you want to do with the rest of your life. Like, we ask students what they're going to major in, and they go and they say, well, I think I want to do something like this. And to figure it actually out may take all 6 years of college, right? Or I don't know how long, 5 to 6 or 7 years. And even then, people graduate, they get a major, and then they go do something different. Transitions are hard. They take time. They take patience. But the thing is this, is that God is trustworthy. And he will lead us through them. And he makes us two promises about that we can rely on. The first is that God is with you. In Deuteronomy chapter 31, he says, do not be afraid. Don't be discouraged. The Lord will personally go ahead of you. He will be with you. He will never fail nor abandon you. If you want proof of this, take a look in the rearview mirror. Look how far you've come. Whether it's 8, 18, 38, or 88 years, turn around and look at where you've been. Can you see in your life how God has been faithful? Can you see where God has been present in the good and sometimes even in the bad and in the struggles? Can you see where he has led you and pointed you in the right directions, where God has not failed you so far? And if you can, if you can see that God has brought you this far, then I promise you, you can also trust that he'll never fail you. He'll never abandon you in the future. He will be with you in the next stage of your life going forward, and the one after that, and the one after that, and the one after that. And that leads to the second promise, which is that God will get you where he is leading you. Philippians 1:6, Paul writes, being confident of this, he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Jesus Christ. And that leads us to the second part of that final reminder, 4b. Because God's promise is trustworthy, because we've seen it and we've lived it out this far in our lives, we can stay the course. Knowing God is with us, knowing he will guide us, means that our response is to stay the course, to be faithful to him as he has been faithful to us, because we know that we are not there yet. Graduation, transition, change, adjustment. None of these moments in life are the finish line. They are mile markers, they're stop points, they're rest areas, they're pillars and things that we erect along the way as moments to look back on and moments that propel us forward. The path, it is long. And the finish line, it's somewhere off in the distance. Paul writes in Philippians 3, he says, brothers and sisters, I do not consider myself yet to have taken hold of it, but there is one thing I do. Forgetting what is behind and straining towards what is ahead, I press on toward the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. And of course, since we're on our fourth point and we haven't gotten to our quote guide for the day, we're going to turn back to Eric. You see, he takes Paul's words and he puts them into context. After winning the gold in the Paris Olympics in 1924 and breaking a world record in the 400, this was a record that actually stood in Europe for 12 years, right? He was being interviewed, and like Paul, he knew that this was not the pinnacle of his life or of his faith. It wasn't the end. He said that there was something bigger that he was gunning for. And he said, it has been a wonderful experience to compete in the Olympic Games. It has been great to bring home a gold medal. But since I have been a young lad, I have had my eyes on a different prize. You see, each one of us is in a greater race than any I have ever run in Paris. And this race ends when God gives out the medals. Faith. All of our lives, it's a journey. You haven't lived your whole life, and you haven't yet experienced everything that God has in store for you. There is more life to live, and that means that there are going to be more changes and more transitions and more adjustments. There are going to be highs and lows, successes and failures, and as you face each one of them, be reminded, pursue your passion, live God's purpose, follow God's leading, and stay the course. Because you can trust in his promises. So speaking of staying the course, today we are celebrating our graduating high school seniors. They'll be arriving here in a few minutes, and we'll be recognizing them up front at the end of the next service and praying for them. But within our community and within our church, we have watched these students grow. We have watched them begin to discover who they are and what it is that God is calling them to be. And so as we're getting ready to send them out into the world, as we're getting ready to bless them and for them to go and make this next transition in their life, we wanted to recognize them at each of our services today. So we've got a video that we want you to see. It's just an opportunity to see who those students are, what their plans are for next. And as you see them come in between the services, I want to invite you after you watch the video, you hang around, get a donut. But as you see them start to come in, give them a congratulations, shake their hand if you're comfortable with that, and we'll get to pray for them and everything at the last service. So just thank you for being here today. We want you to check out this video, and we'll Michelle will come up here in a few minutes and let you guys go. Lost my transition.
I just love how much of a family it is. It's like my second family. I couldn't live without these people that are in the church.
Being a part of this church has helped my faith grow by just knowing that there's so many people that are there for me to back me up, and just the community once again, seeing that there's so many people that are praying for me, like in my parents' life group, and just knowing that I'm always supported.
I hope that my faith will help me in college and after that, just because I know that college can be really difficult, and especially during these times when you don't know exactly what's going to happen, you can always turn to God to help you, and just know that the water's edge is always there.
My favorite memories come from mission trips, for sure. Just the van rides, just getting to know who's going on the trip, especially when you go to the emergency room for drinking too much Red Bull and having Michael Hall make you a turkey out of a glove.
Say they've impacted me pretty well. Craig and Chad have impacted me with some of the words that they've said. They've done a lot. They've helped out a lot. Everyone here has helped out. Just a lot of people here say some pretty smart stuff.
I love that part in the sermon where Chad said, no matter what, God's going to get you where you're going. And that's true for these seniors. That's true for all of us here in the room today. You know, whether you're in transition or you're just sitting there wondering, hey, God, what's next? We just want to encourage you this week to lean into him and know that he is going to get you where you need to be. So you guys have a great week, and we'll see you soon here at the Water's Edge.